One of the most frustrating things about being a Tolkien fan is that what we have now is basically all we're going to get. The 2021 publishing of Nature of Middle-earth was, at least as far as we're aware, most of the last of Tolkien's unpublished works. Barring a miraculous discovery of a trove of previously missing notes, this is probably going to be the last substantial release of information. But occasionally, unseen works do surface, and on the 20th of July 2026, a letter has surfaced that has finally solved one of Middle-earth's longest mysteries. If you spend any time on Tolkien-related forums, you've probably seen theories about the Tree Man. The Tree Man comes from a tale that Samwise Gamgee is telling to Ted Sandyman, Hobbiton's miller and a character of dubious morals. Sam is telling Ted about strange sightings throughout the Shire, including his cousin Hal apparently seeing a tree man in the North Moors of the Shire. According to Hal, this tree man was as tall as an elm tree, and each of its strides measured 7 yards. Ted is having none of it and tells Sam that Hal probably just saw an elm tree, to which Sam responds that there are no elms in the North Moors. This has led to numerous theories over the years. The most common one is that Hal saw an ent or a Huorn. While the Shire is far from Fangorn, the Old Forest may have had Huorns, like Old Man Willow is often theorized to be. We also know from Treebeard's songs that in the Elder Days, the Ents did often travel around. A theory that reaches even further than that is that Hal actually saw an Entwife. Their whereabouts has been unaccounted for since Sauron destroyed their gardens in the Second Age, so it's possible one could have went to the Shire. After all, the Entwives were renowned for their gardens, and the Shire is a pleasant land. Another theory is a simple one. Hal was just a liar, as Ted Sandyman does point out that Hal always says he sees things, lowering his credibility. It's worth noting that when Tolkien originally wrote this scene, there was no mention of a tree man. Instead, the creature is just referred to as a giant and was said to have been as big as a tower or at least a tree. However, at this time, Tolkien had not yet invented Ents. They would be a spontaneous creation later on. Tolkien would then go back and change the chapter, changing the spelling until he settled on treemen and made clear the comparison to a tree. Obviously, all signs point towards this being an Ent, but Tolkien himself cast doubt on this theory. In 1964, in a letter to James Heath, Tolkien said that he didn't think it was an Entwife that Hal saw in the North Moors, and instead that it may have been some kind of troll. This would be possible too. When Merry and Pippin first encounter Treebeard, he is described as almost troll-like. For someone like Hal who has seen neither an Ent or a troll, there's no way for him to know the difference. Also, Treebeard mentions that some things look like Ents, yet actually aren't, once again implying that there could be trolls that don't look so different. This may have been the inspiration for wood trolls from Lord of the Rings Online. This raises the question of why a troll would be so close to the Shire, given that it's meant to be protected by the Rangers. Evidently, one must have slipped through the net. But then, just a few days ago, information was made public that revealed that Tolkien changed his mind. A company called Christie's, which auctions off historical and valuable antiques, arts, and other items, posted a manuscript that was written by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is a letter that is dated to the 28th of February 1966, so after the previous letter, and it's written to one Jenny Hall. In this letter, Tolkien answers the question. The walking tree that Hal saw was not an Entwife or a troll, it was just the most obvious answer all along. An Ent. But while Hal was telling the truth about what he saw, it's worth mentioning that he's still a liar to a degree. He grossly exaggerated the stride of an Ent, there's no way that it was 7 yards. What makes this letter even more interesting is that Tolkien explained why an Ent was in the Shire. It was there because Gandalf had actually asked one or two of them to go there to help keep a watch. This might mean that Gandalf felt the guard of the Rangers was not enough, and that to stave off a possibility of becoming tree-like, some of the more adventurous Ents should travel north and help protect the Shire. But this raises another question. If there were one or two Ents guarding the Shire, why didn't they intervene during Lotho and Sharky's takeover? I think there's two possible answers to this. One is that Gandalf directed them to intervene only when necessary, if the Shire encountered a threat that they had no chance of dealing with themselves. After all, this is how Gandalf operates. He's there to help and guide, not to do all the heavy lifting himself, unless he encounters something too powerful like a Balrog. we see that before he parts ways with the hobbits before they return to the Shire, he is very much aware that something is wrong in the Shire, but he basically tells them that they're big boys and that they're on their own. The other simple alternative is that these Guardian Ents simply had no idea about the Scouring. The Shire is a fairly large place if it's just 2 Ents on patrol. It's roughly the size of a country like Bosnia. The Ent that Hal spotted was in the North Moors, in the far northern reaches of the Shire, whereas the Scouring mostly took place in the southwestern corner of the Shire, in places like Mickledelving, Hopperton and Tuckborough. And it's not like the Ents would have had contact with the local hobbits to receive word of it. Basically, if they didn't see it, they probably didn't have a way to know it was happening. However, it's possible Ents may have been able to communicate with animals and thus could have heard tidings from them. But it gets even better. Ever wary of creating plot holes, Tolkien also added to the letter that when Treebeard met Merry and Pippin, he was actually pretending to not know what hobbits were, given that he should have known what they were after meeting Gandalf. Admittedly, this may seem like a stretch, but it does actually fit Treebeard's character. When speaking to Merry and Pippin, Treebeard isn't entirely forthcoming with information. He knows more about events in the outside world than the hobbits suspect, and when they mention Gandalf being lost in Moria, Treebeard says nothing. At that point in time, Gandalf had just come to Treebeard and the two had spoken, and later on at Isengard, the hobbits are surprised to see that Treebeard is actually not surprised to see Gandalf alive. So after 70 years, we finally have our definitive answer to the identity of the Tree Man in the North Moors. It was an Ent that went to the Shire to help keep a watch on it after Gandalf went to Fangorn, presumably met with Treebeard and then requested it. The Ent didn't protect the Shire during the Scouring because it either didn't know or was ordered not to intervene unless the need was great. And as for Treebeard, he did know what hobbits were because Gandalf had likely already discussed them with him, but when meeting Merry and Pippin, he feigned ignorance, either for his own amusement or because he wished to hear the hobbits explain what they actually are themselves. Now, this certainly isn't a game-changing mystery that is going to redefine Middle-earth, nor is the answer outlandish compared to what people were already theorizing. That said, there's so many mysteries that we're never going to get the answer to because there's probably very little unseen works of Tolkien that still remain. So yeah, getting something like this is still cool, and I guess it does give a little hope that there might still be a few things out there that can perhaps shine some light on other dark places in Middle-earth. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I think the funniest thing with the new letter is that it's perfect proof that Tolkien was an overthinker. He typed up the letter using a typewriter, was clearly happy with it at first, but then before sending it off, he was like, wait, no, possible plot hole, and added another sentence by hand to the bottom. I think it also shows that he put a lot of thought and effort into his replies to fans, which is nice. Also, if you have some spare cash lying around and want to pick up the original letter, you're in luck because it's only expected to go for £5,000 or so. Cheers, farewell, and remember, no, we're still not going to get an answer to Tom Bombadil.